The announcement, first of all, these additional 200 Senator armored personnel carriers, we're going to look at them as we speak. Just how helpful is that military aid at this point in the war?
Well, first of all, let me say that in a war, every bit of equipment, ammunition is always helpful. So it's just a question of degrees. The weapon systems, these Senator vehicles, they are predominantly, as we know, security type vehicles, riot control type vehicles, but they have a reasonable bit of armor on them and they can be weaponized. So in what they're going to be used for now, it appears, is like battlefield taxi, if you will. They are not an infantry combat fighting vehicle. They cannot go head to head with Russian tanks and so on. But they can ferry troops up close to the front lines. They can take some shrapnel type fire or small round fire, disperse the troops and pick up wounded and bring them back. So it's a battlefield taxi concept, extremely useful, as all pieces of equipment these days are.
Okay. Where the defense minister had no news, as she said both in English and French, was on the issue of whether Canada will send any Leopard tanks to Ukraine. You heard from the Ukrainian defense minister, his words, these are crucial, very important to the battle, this kind of heavy weaponry. Canada's decision, Andrew, rests on a decision from Germany. Can you explain the connection?
Sure. Now, Canada has the Leopard 2s. I believe we have approximately 82 in stock. But there is a licensing agreement with the Germans that all countries that have bought Leopard 2 cannot export these weapons to any other third party without German agreement. And the Germans right now are withholding agreement. They are also not committing to send their own Leopard 2s. Now, the German position is sort of founded on the fact that they have been very reluctant to provide Ukraine with what they consider to be offensive weapons as opposed to defensive. And that's a very difficult definition. But the point is the Germans do not want to escalate the conflict. And they feel that if they provide these tanks, or they have felt this up until now, that it could expand the war and escalate to a potential war with NATO and nuclear confrontation, that kind of thing. This is where the SPD party of the German coalition has been particularly strong. Okay. Their position that unless the Americans commit their Abrams tanks, which are a very different kind of vehicle, that the Germans don't want to go it alone. But that's today. Now, Scholz is speaking, the German chancellor, in Davos this afternoon. He may comment on this, so we have to watch for that. But whatever happens on Friday in Ramstein at the American-hosted NATO defense ministers meeting, where, of course, Anand will be there, they will have the tank issue front and center. And the new German foreign defense minister, who's just been appointed, will be there and will address the issue. So we are waiting with bated breath on the German decision. So we heard a number of questions to the Ukrainian defense minister on this point. We have talked, you and I, over the war about how the German defense strategy has shifted markedly, surprisingly, but it hasn't gotten to this point yet. There is something called a Leopard coalition. Finland and Poland, they want to send their Leopards to Ukraine, and they're among the countries putting pressure on Germany. We did hear Ukraine's defense minister say he expects Germany will relent. What do you think? Yeah, the speculation right now, the broad speculation, is the Germans will relent. But I'm not going to predict that because that's a pure political decision to be taken by the German chancellor. And he's got his calculations along with his cabinet. So we're just going to have to wait and see. I mean, the mood is that they will, because I think, let me say that people now are coming to understand that this war has its limits. I think people have relearned the rules of the Cold War, that how you can actually fight limited conventional wars within certain limits without having spillovers where you've got contact between NATO and Russian forces in a potential Third World War with the potential nuclear escalation. I think there's a level of comfort now, if I can use that word, that people are understanding the rules of the road and how you fight limited conventional wars underneath the nuclear threshold and not have an unintended expansion of a war or Armageddon, that kind of thing.
It is day 329 of this war as we speak. And on the tank point, the UK has already committed to send 14 of its tanks. It's a different kind of tank. It's the Challenger. And the British Foreign Secretary said this, that his country wanted to bring the war to a conclusion on this day 329. So as we look at a couple of other headlines from what else is happening, the U.S., Andrew, sending in ammunition that it has stored in Israel. Ukrainian soldiers are training on the Patriot missile defense system in the U.S. right now. The U.S. Secretary of Defense, he's been meeting with Ukrainian military leaders in Poland. All of this going on. What is happening on day 329? Are we reaching a sort of crescendo in this?
We are reaching a crescendo in terms of preparation for major offensive operations by both Ukraine and we expect the Russians as well in the late winter, early spring period. And from a Western point of view, there is this now massive movement. And this is where the Germans may relent on the Leopard. We'll see. The point is there is this massive movement to provide all the arms that are possible to Ukraine to assist them in this upcoming offensive operation. And this offensive operation, as well as the Russian offensive operation, will then determine the next phase of this war. Because right now, the lines for the last few months have been more or less stalemated. There is a kind of a strategic pause, Bakhmut and Soledar notwithstanding, but they are minor, relatively speaking, to the strategic front. So we're going to see how the offensive operations will then shape the dynamics politically after these offensives take place. And it will shape the potential for an end to the war or not, because it may not be decisive. No side may have a decisive advantage. And if not, then the fighting will probably continue, but the effects of this offensive will still influence the political calculus of both the Ukrainians, the West on one side, and the Russians on the other side. And I should also say that Russians really view this now as a war of Russia against the West, with Ukraine as the proxy. And that's how they're looking at it now.
Vladimir Putin just this morning said victory in Ukraine is unavoidable. Anita Anna just this morning, as we heard her say live, Ukraine will win. Is it realistic to contemplate an outright Ukrainian military victory at this point, Andrew?
This would be a difficult call. My betting thus far would be that the armies would fight each other to a level of exhaustion, I believe, and then perhaps some kind of a ceasefire. This is not the Ukrainian position, I realize that, nor Canadian position. We talk about a total victory, which means expelling all Russian forces from occupied Ukraine, including Crimea. For me, this is a very tall order. The Russians are not weak. They are strengthening their forces, and they will defend particularly Crimea with everything they've got. So I think that we're looking at more or less some kind of a saw-off than an outright victory by either side. The Russians see this as I said, as a war against the West. Ukraine's the proxy. They want a regime change in Ukraine. I don't think they're going to get that either. But this is a massive war. That's why these operations, these offensives, will continue to influence the political calculus. But we can't see where it's going yet. We just know we're going to have some heavy fighting first.